Hi, this is Debony Morgan, your host for Zeitgeist podcast, The Spirit of Now, where we talk with spiritual leaders and influencers and just cool folks to give you an insight into what's going on at ZG and what kind of spiritual happenings are going on in the world at large. Today, we're talking to someone we've spoken to before, our storyteller guy, Phil Foster, who is also our recluse in residence. Phil is a wonderful guy that is ordained in the Disciples of Christ and also has shamanic training. He is a retired professional counselor and supervisor, so he's bringing that therapeutic piece. And he's also a lay Cistercian at the Monastery of the Holy Spirit. So Phil's got a lot of ground covered. But we're talking to him today specifically about storytelling because he's going to be sharing a story with us on Friday, April 23rd. And we wanted a little more background about storytelling in general, talk about our last gathering, and maybe pose a few questions that will help you be ready to attend our next storytelling event. So Phil, it's great to talk to you again. Welcome to the Spirit of Now. As our recluse in residence, that reminds me that you are R&R like rock and roll.
Well, we'll rock and roll some storytelling today. How's that?
I believe it.
Great to talk with you, Debbie.
Cool. So let's start. I mean, some people have listened to our prior conversation and some may not have. So let me just start with a very basic question. Why are we doing storytelling, and what does that have to do with spirituality? Like, what is the importance of that?
Which is a really important question. Maybe the important question in this context. We're all telling stories. We have our individual stories that we tell and that go through all these permutations, all these chapters in our lives. And there's meaning and there's non-meaning and there's randomness and there's coherence. And so we're all doing this all the time. And we are collectively also telling stories. And people have always told stories. That seems to be one of the things that characterizes our species. We tell stories. There are other things, but one of the things we do is tell stories. So one of the things that has impressed me throughout my life has been when people gather together to tell and listen to stories, something powerful happens, something important happens, something large happens. We get in touch with ourselves in new ways, and we get in touch with what community is like in different ways and very meaningful ways. Storytelling is a lot like dream work to me. Mm-hmm. And in dream work, we ask questions about, what do all these characters represent that I'm dreaming about? The same is true in storytelling. What are these characters parts of me? Are they outside of me? Are both of those things true? We can look at the characters and the plot lines in stories as thematic variations that go on in the universe as a whole. We can look at them as energies in the universe. And what is our relationship to that? How do we react to stories? And we also know that, there is no the story. There probably is a grand story. And how privy are we to that? Well, our physicists are working on that. And the best they can tell us is we're all dancing strings telling stories at this point. So we tell stories for, I think, to build community, to understand community better, to come together. And storytelling has a power of reconciliation and healing. So there are a number of levels that storytelling is just extremely powerful.
Yeah, agree. And as we were joking before, I mean, this could be a conversation that went on for months and months, just talking about the power and the importance of story. Let me ask you specifically, and this will be a segue into, where we wanted to go to talk about the gathering, but, so you can access story via reading a book. You can watch a movie. You can stream an entire television series. There are many ways to encounter story. Say a little bit more about the magic of, person to person storytelling.
Yeah, the sense of transparency and openness that is created both, even one-on-one telling your story to someone else, or telling a story with which you're familiar, or again like in a gathering. We begin to discover who we really are. The story helps us to drop some of our preconceived notions about the way things are. For instance, oh, you like that character? I didn't like that character at all. I thought that character was, really out of bounds. We saw some of that with, the last telling. And that particular story always elicits that kind of response in people. With the Story of Bluebeard, which is the last story we told. And I've told that story hundreds of times, literally, both one-on-one and with large groups of people. And the response is often the same. In our group, but we had, I think, about 45 people. It was a nice group of folks who joined us in the ethers. And some people were really put off by the story, right? And that, as well they should be, right? Some people were very put off by the story. Other people were enchanted, by the story, to use a storytelling word. They really got sucked into it and what's going to happen and, all this. Some people were very confessional, I thought. I was a little surprised even about how deeply it affected them, both negatively and about how much, again, they identified with a certain character that maybe most people weren't identifying with. And that's always good to hear. It's good to hear because it humanizes all these elements that are in each of us. I think it was also always interesting when people get together and tell stories, people remember different things. Was that said? Really? I don't remember that. That's always the case. And it tells us something about ourselves. And it tells us something about, this particular community that we're in. Right. People object to, how things go, right? What I change? At what point would I change it? Would I change the beginning? Would I change the end? Would I change the middle? And the other thing is where do I encounter surprise? I think that's one of the best things that we can share with one another in life. And story is great for eliciting that. That really surprised me. I didn't see that coming, or I didn't expect that reaction from someone else in this group. So those are all, it opens us, it makes us, it drops our preconceived, our cancel culture, our politically correct, our day-to-day personas that we present to the world. It sort of allows us and gives us permission to just be very transparent and authentic. And I think the last telling was very typical in that regard because it really touched some people in a very profound and loving and meaningful way. And it also really got some people upset. And, and that's fairly typical of storytelling and storytelling in communities. But it's impossible for that group not to convene again, at least some of them, and not to have been affected by that. To say, oh, I remember that such and such happened here. This offended someone, or it really surprised me that person identified with that character so much.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to emphasize the aspect of safety that I think that to pat ourselves on the back, I think that we create an environment where people feel like it's okay to disagree and it's okay to be transparent and talk about how that reminds you of something that was painful for you. And so, as a storyteller, you've really created this warm and accepting environment for people to have genuine responses to the tale. And I think at ZG, we really work hard conscientiously to make it a place for people to bring themselves and to really absorb things deeply.
Knowing that you may disagree with someone else, or you may
Absolutely
have a reaction, that being the point, that we learn to hold different reactions, knowing that people's experiences are different. There is no correct experience or interpretation of the story. Now, we can certainly talk about certain universal elements that may emerge in the telling or in the receiving of the story. What the community, what the gathering, what it elicits with them. But there is no correct interpretation of any story. I mean, you look at you look at Buddhism, you look at Christianity, these stories that have been told for thousands of years now. And there are all kinds of sects and denominations and ways of interpreting and thinking about that and being with that and having experience of that. So,
and I would add that fluidity of response is not just between different people at the same moment, but it's also within ourselves. When I was younger, I made the practice of rereading The Women Who Run with the Wolves every other year, because the way I would come at it would be different after 2 years of life experience, and the place where it would connect with me would be different. So that fluidity is even within ourselves when we come back to approach the same content.
Absolutely. Really well said. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's what people can expect when they come to our next one. And for our audience, this is something that we're hoping to do every quarter, because this storytelling gathering is so juicy and and Phil, we're so lucky to have you to do that for us. Do you have any teaser questions for people if they're going to log in and listen to Skeleton Woman? Is there anything that they might want to chew on before they approach the story with you?
Well, of course, as we've mentioned, and you mentioned just now, we've mentioned before, there are two primary source textbooks for my storytelling. There are many books and sources for storytelling, but two really important ones in my life have been Clarissa Pinkola Estes' Women Who Run with Wolves. And sort of a counterbalance and dance with that book is the book by Michael Meade, a mythologist, called Men and the Water of Life, which is both just wonderful, rich, love the word juicy. That's a great word. Just full, fecund storytelling, and master mythologists who talk about the implications of these stories. So that's a good source for people to check out. I would say that, in regards to Skeleton Woman in particular, I would say, there's a continuation of the sense of the feminine being the protagonist in both of these stories. In Bluebeard, the youngest sister is the protagonist. And then in the story of Skeleton Woman, we in many ways watch a woman over the course of her life, though the very beginning of her life and the very end of her life are just alluded to almost. Mm-hmm. It's this middle piece. It's all the journeying in between the beginning and the end that the story takes up. It might be a story about romance. It certainly could be interpreted that way. And what do we mean by romance? What do we mean by relatedness with men and women in this particular case? In the literal case of the story, it is a young fisherman and a skeleton woman who get involved. And but it could just as easily be two men or two women or two non-binary people just as easily. We can't get too hung up on the literalism in stories. If we start taking things literally, that's where fundamentalism comes in. That's where my tribe begins to shrink. If you're shrinking the tribe, then you're not really telling much of a story. You're talking to yourself.
Absolutely.
And so we want to broaden the base with storytelling. This story might be about managing fear. There's a lot of, it's a skeleton woman. It's kind of a scary story, right? She's a skeleton woman. So there's some pieces about managing fear. It might be about what I would call deep listening. What do we really listen to? Not just that normal chatter that runs through my head all day long, as most of us do in modern life. We're constantly running a story in our head. What's up underneath that? There's some deep listening that goes on in the story that's very powerful, and it invites us to develop that facility, that listening within ourselves and with others. It might be a story about what service looks like. It might be a story about how we are conceived as elders. It might be a story about the spiritual path in general. It might be about something else that I haven't thought of. It might be about something else that we discover when we gather together. I think it's all those things and more. I have heard all those things and more talked about in the telling of Skeleton Woman in the past. It is absolutely one of my favorite stories.
Oh, I'm so glad that you're going to be sharing it with us from that place. And I love the openness with which we can say it might be this, it might be that. It reminds me that Jesus taught in parables, and it reminds me of tarot reading, that the real power is where you meet yourself through this. It's not knowledge that gets handed to you to file in the correct place in your brain. It's an open way of engaging with meaning and wisdom in order to find yourself. And so I just very, very grateful for this opportunity, Phil, that we're going to get to listen to you again. And hopefully we're going to make the drums work okay this time. I mean, the drum works fine. Phil works fine. Zoom's audio is where we've got our challenge. And I think we're up to that challenge this time.
We will either drum or we will not.
It's going to be great either way. Well, let me go ahead and close out by reminding folks that, if you are as enamored with Phil as we are, we encourage you to join us on Friday, April 23rd, 7 p.m. This event will be a ZG Zoom event, but we are hoping in the future that we will be able to get together in the same room and experience that kind of gathering with a hybrid event as Zooming it as well. But in the meantime, this will be an online event. Phil, you feel like this story is going to be okay for children, or what should parents have in mind if they want to bring the whole family?
I think this is pretty PG.
I think so too.
I think this is pretty PG. It's no worse than most fairy tales.
Yeah.
Which can be pretty bad, but this one's pretty benign, I think, for the most part. It is a skeleton woman. It is a skeleton.
Yeah, I think kids spend a lot of Halloween time looking at skeletons. I think.
It's probably a little easier to digest for kids than Bluebeard is.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, in the future we'll have to have a more therapeutic conversation about Bettelheim and how kids interact with fairy tales. That might be a good conversation for another time. So here's how it works, folks, is this is a free event, but you do need to register or you won't get the link. So you can visit our website at zgatl.org, and there's a link right on the front page. You can go out and register and join us to listen to Phil talk about Skeleton Woman. Thanks so much for your time and wisdom and joy that you always bring today, Phil.
You're very sweet here. I look forward to seeing everybody again.
Yeah, me too. Thanks, folks. See you there.